What's up, everyone? Welcome back to EG's Garage. Today, as the title of the video suggests, I'm going to be doing a review of the Maximum Motorsports Coilovers kit for any 99 to 04 Cobra Mustang with the IRS suspension. Now, this kind of suspension setup is not common for the 99 to 04 Cobra, and there's really not a lot of videos or information out there about the quality or just reviews in general about these coilover kits. So I thought I'd share my experience. I've had these coilovers on since June, so I have some good experience. I've been to around 6 autocross events now with this coilover setup, so I've driven it hard, and I've gotten a feel for what the setup's like on both the road and on the track. So getting straight to the point, what is the stock suspension setup with the 99 to 04 Cobras, and how do these coilovers differ? So the stock suspension setup is a McPherson strut and spring setup. So basically, the spring is separate from the strut and shock, and the spring rests in between the control arm and the body of the car. So with that, it's very common for owners to switch out the stock springs, leave the traditional setup, and just switch out the stock springs with some stiffer springs or some drag rate springs. Common for people to want to lower these cars or put stiffer or softer suspension on, depending on what kind of setup they want to use for the car. Now, just in general, some issues and some pros and cons of doing coilovers versus having that stock suspension setup or putting in an aftermarket spring like a H&R race spring or an Eibach spring. Now, with the coilovers, you have the ability to adjust your ride height regardless of what kind of coilover kit you go with. Pretty much every single coilover kit, you're going to be able to adjust the ride height. So with the spring, you're not going to be able to do that. Whatever ride height you get is what you have to stay with. With coilovers, you have the ability to adjust the ride height of the suspension. On the Maximum Motorsports coilovers, it's easy. It's just a little hex key. You turn, loosen the lower spring perch, and then you can rotate the lower spring perch to lower the car. So that's one benefit of having coilovers over having a traditional spring setup. Additionally, a lot of these kits, including the one I have, the Maximum Motorsports kits, have dampening adjustability for the struts and shocks. Now, you can easily just go buy aftermarket struts and shocks for the car with a traditional spring setup, and you can adjust those struts and shocks. I'll be talking about this later, but I have the Koni single adjustable shocks for my Maximum Motorsports coilover kit, and those ones are adjustable, but you can also get those shocks and struts separately without having to buy the coilovers with the stock springs or with any aftermarket spring. So that's just another benefit of doing coilovers, is generally the kits will come with shocks that are adjustable. Additionally, just in terms of performance, the springs that are offered, the traditional springs that are offered for the 99 to 04 Cobras are not going to be as stiff as the coilover options you can get. And what I mean by this is the spring rates of the springs in the McPherson setup, you can get some pretty stiff springs. The H&R race springs are pretty stiff. They're actually not much softer than the springs I have now for my coilover setup. However, I'm also running a very conservative coilover setup. I could be going way stiffer, and there's really no options out there that can compete with the level of stiffness that the Maximum Motorsports kit and other coilover kits can get you for your suspension. Now, what are the cons of having coilovers in these cars? I mean, just in general, and people who have these cars know that there's not a lot of clearance between the tire and the fender well. There's a lot of areas for rubbing, including the IRS bolt, which a lot of people put a low profile bolt in. Even then, if you go with a wider tire, it can scrape there. Well, if you have coilovers, it actually, both in the front and the back, it decreases the amount of room you have for wider tires. So you have less clearance, even less than you would have without that. I know a lot of people like to run wider tires, so you have to keep in mind that you might run into more clearance issues with those tires, with the coilovers for wider tires. Additionally, for these cars in the front, there's an issue with any coilover kit and rubbing on the top of the spring with the area where the strut mounts to the caster camber plates. Up in that area, there's just a metal tab that needs to get bent, and that's kind of a pain in the butt to do, or it can be a pain in the butt to do. And then if you don't do that correctly, then you can have some rubbing issues up there, and obviously that's not good. You don't want to damage the spring, which another issue with this car compared to doing just a traditional spring setup. Ride quality, if you go and this is, a lot of people say coilovers have worse ride quality. I will say that the coilovers I have now, same ride quality as stock, honestly, and I have way stiffer springs. Now, on these cars specifically, you actually have better ride quality for the stiffness of the spring with a coilover setup versus the McPherson setup. And that's just because of where the spring is versus where the spring is on the coilover. It allows for, I don't know the exact engineering of it, but reading some technical posts and technical articles on it, you actually get better ride quality for the spring rate. And what I mean by this is spring rate for spring rate. Let's say you have the same stiffness spring, you're going to have a better ride quality with the coilovers. Now, obviously, if you go with the super stiff setup, yes, your ride quality is going to be diminished from what you get stock. But if you go with a more conservative setup like I'm doing, even if it's way stiffer than stock, you're still really not going to diminish your ride quality too much. So, excuse me. Going into the Maximum Motorsports kit specifically, just kind of going through what this kit has to offer and whether this is a purchase that's worth it. So the kit's very customizable. That's one of the best parts about this kit. The first thing you see when you select this kit, you have the option to choose, and it comes with caster camber plates. So you have the option to choose a finish on the caster camber plates. I just went with the standard black finish. Don't really need the chrome ones. And then you also get a variety of strut and shock options. So you can go with the Bilsteins, 3 different levels of Maximum Motorsports shocks and struts, or you can go with the Conies. I went with the Conies just because they're not as expensive as the Maximum Motorsports ones, and they're the same performance-wise as the Bilsteins, which also, by the way, are the stock Cobra shocks and struts, except the Conies are adjustable, which is nice to be able to adjust the rebound and dampening of the shocks, especially for autocross and track use. Now, with this kit, you also get the opportunity, when you buy it, you get a free tech support. So once I bought the kit, I emailed the Maximum Motorsports tech department, asked them based on my setup and what I wanted to get out of the car, what would be the ideal spring rates, the ideal spring lengths, so they can customize all of that for you. And I ended up going with the 375-pound spring in the front and a 600-pound spring in the back. They go all the way up to 600 pounds in the front and 650 in the rear. I don't remember what the low end of it is, but you can go with a lot softer for some of those street strip setups that a lot of people go with for these cars, which are definitely more common than an autocross setup. So you have a lot of customization with this kit, and that's definitely one of my favorite parts about it. Additionally, the customer service, like I mentioned, you get free tech support, and it was great. They were super helpful, and keep in mind these guys are super knowledgeable and about all Mustang suspension, regardless of what generation you have, whether that's 9904, if maybe you have a newer S550, SY97, whatever you have, they're super knowledgeable, and they will help you out, and they're the experts when it comes to suspension tuning of these cars. So keep that in mind when you're ordering with them. Compared to some other companies, these guys are the true Mustang experts when it comes to performance suspension parts. Now, that's the good about the kit. There's one downside to it. I mean, obviously the price is pretty high compared to what you're going to get with some regular spring setups. And there are some cheaper coilover kits we're going to go into. But the only downside from a product quality perspective is the fact that there's actually an issue where the diameter of the spring is wider than the diameter of the upper spring perch. So what could theoretically happen is if the strut compresses upwards, and then the spring could theoretically come off of the lower spring perch, lose contact with that, and then the spring could end up falling back on to the lower spring perch, not seated properly. Now, this is very unlikely to happen. I mean, this isn't a Raptor. We're not jumping off. We're not taking big jumps or anything, but at the same time, you're paying this much money for the coilover kit. You shouldn't even have to be worried about an issue like that. So there's something to keep in mind with this kit. It was really confusing when I was trying to install it. It just threw me off how the spring, like if you put the spring on the strut and tilt the strut upside down, the spring just falls off. So it's kind of weird. The spring's basically just held by the weight of the car. But yeah, I haven't had any issues with it, but that is a possibility to keep in mind when you go with these kits. So looking at the competition, first the first obvious choice is just the regular stock springs. Don't even upgrade your suspension at all. Well, with the stock springs, obviously you're going to look like you're driving a 4x4, and you are going to have a very soft suspension that's not going to be good for track use, and honestly not even good for drag strip use because of the spring rate. So it's really just not an ideal setup. Like I said, I've run about 6 autocross events with these coilovers, and it's absolute night and day going from what I had before with the stock springs to what I have now. And it just put a smile on my face driving this car. So much less body roll, takes the corners so much better. And again, I'm running a pretty conservative coilover spring rate setup compared to what else is offered from Maximum Motorsports. Comparing to the aftermarket springs, obviously aftermarket springs are going to be a lot cheaper, but like I've already mentioned, there's not that many options out there for the stiffness to match the maximum possible stiffness you can get from Maximum Motorsports. Additionally, like I've already mentioned, they are a lot cheaper, so that is the big positive of these aftermarket springs. You're looking at, for the H&R springs, about $280, $290, and then you can get some iBox springs for low $300. So these are a lot cheaper. Obviously, the stock springs are the cheapest because you're not spending money on anything. Then aftermarket springs would be the next cheapest option. The next cheapest option after that are BC coilovers. So these coilovers will run you, looking at a website, Coilover Depot. It's actually cheaper here than their website, but you're looking at $995 for the kit. Now, with this kit, you don't get the choice of spring rates. The spring rate is about 390 in the front, and then about 440-ish in the rear. So this is obviously soft. It's stiffer in the front actually than what I have, but softer in the rear by a lot. From what I have, and that's the only options you have. Additionally, I've seen some reviews. These aren't the same quality level, but I mean, if you're just looking to lower your car and slam it and have that ride adjustability, and aren't too concerned about going out to autocross or open track and winning too many events, then this is probably a good kit for you. It's a lot cheaper than the Maximum Motorsports kits. The next competition is the KW coilover kit. So this is state-of-the-art quality, KW super reliable suspension brand. Now, my only issue with this, obviously, is they're priced really high. I mean, you're looking at about $2,600. Now, if you're going with the Maximum Motorsports option, where you go with the Maximum Motorsports struts and shocks, you're going to be running yourself up into that price range. So KW is better quality. So maybe if you're going with one of those options, then maybe you should go with KW. However, The KWs don't have that same level of adjustability and customization that the Maximum Motorsports kits do. And KW, by just virtue of it being a Mustang, and especially an older Mustang at that, I would trust the technicians and the engineers over at Maximum Motorsports more, who have more experience with these cars and are more well versed in Mustangs overall, especially these older Mustangs that aren't as modified today. For an S550 or something, I would definitely go with the KW kit. I'm sure they've engineered those really well. I don't know if I trust them as much as Maximum Motorsports engineering wise for these cars. That's the competition. Final verdict here. In my opinion, overall, the Maximum Motorsports kit is probably the best coilover kit, just because it's kind of middle of the line in terms of price, and you get the options of all that customization, and then the different spring rates, which if you're an autocross and track driver, and that's the goal for this car, which is if you're going with coilovers, that's probably the best setup to do coilovers for. This is definitely a better kit for you than, say, a BC. Like, you want to spend the extra money to get this kit over the BC racing kit. And then if you want to go with KW, that's great too. But again, this kit, you can swap out the springs whenever you want to fine-tune your handling and go stiffer or softer if you so desire. Now, coilovers are probably not for you if you... Or the Maximum Motorsports coilovers are definitely not for you if all you want is just to be able to adjust your ride height and slam the car for like a car show, maybe get a little bit of a stiffer suspension. Definitely go with the BC coilovers if that's the case for you. There's definitely not worth it for the Maximum Motorsports kit if that's your goal. And then if you want to just lower your car and maybe get a little bit stiffer and don't care about adjustability and everything, and then definitely go with springs. The H&R race springs are a great alternative to a coilover kit because they're pretty stiff. I had these in my 01 Cobra before I had my 03 Cobra, and they're a good kit. They're good springs. Definitely not as stiff as you can go with the coilover kit, but you're going to get handling you desire if that's the upgrade you want. You're going to get good handling improvement, and then it's going to be a lot cheaper on your wallet. And yeah, you're going to get that lowered stance from that as well. So those are just some things to keep in mind. I hope you guys can learn something from this video and can kind of take that away if you're looking to purchase coilovers for this car. If you like this video, please press that like button and leave a comment with any suggestions for future videos or suggestions for improvements. And then also, please press that subscribe button if you enjoy this channel and want to see more content. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time.